Hello, Joe. I just want to take this time to talk about the journey and process in my professional growth goal and opportunity for the 2016-2017 school year. So essentially, my goal revolved around mapping out our curriculum a little bit more in ELA, English Language Arts, and reading in order to come up with some power standards that could potentially be put on a new report card for reporting purposes. That discussion has been floating around for a while, and I thought I wanted to maybe get ahead of the game a little bit, maybe redefine things in our curriculum a little bit more. So if it ever came to that, I'd be ready, our fourth grade would be ready, and maybe potentially our 3-5 unit or elementary school. For that, I essentially used our reading curriculum and unit test goals and things to sort of streamline and guide what I used and came up with power standards. That probably provided more of an opportunity for me as a teacher. Maybe it was more teacher-centered, my goal. And so earlier in the year, we had a conversation or some conversations and email exchanges where you encouraged or challenged me to come up with a student component a little bit more. So I use these power standards also when giving our students some reading research projects to work on this year as well. And in order for students to work on their reading research projects, they had to answer an essential question from the reading unit that we taught. And then in order to answer and prove that, they did that through the form of a project, but they also had to use a reading strategy and skill to demonstrate their growth and learning. So I used these power standards as a template for report card purposes one day. We did have some brief changes in our report card this year, but that came more as a result of the switch to using Skyward. But I wanted to use it for report card purposes. I also wanted to kind of look at how did these power standards match up with our formal and traditional teaching, and then also how did that all match up with maybe more project-based learning. So there's a lot of successes along the way, but also some bumps in the road. And I guess I just want to talk about the journey and process, and I'll probably talk about some hurdles that came along the way. They were minor ones, but yet things to think about and to work through. So one of the first things, like many things in education, is time or lack of time and just running out of time. We have 6 units in reading, and in the past I've gotten through 4 or 5 units. I try and dive into things a little bit more and maybe get into the quality of things more instead of worrying about, the quantity and how many numbers and units and pages we're going to cover and things like that. But so with unit test, I wanted to get through 3 or 4. Right now we've gotten through 2, and we might get through another one. In terms of projects, I wanted to get through 3 reading projects. So far we've gotten through 2. I did also make our social studies fair project a part of this goal too, because I just knew it would take some time, and I thought there was some relevance there as well. At the end of the year here, we might get into our last project, which is a combination of kiddos would be able to pick some questions and strategies and skills from either Unit 3 or Unit 4. So there was the time of that, and maybe not covering as much with unit test and projects, but I think that's okay. Also, another thing, kind of working through is I put together in the packet of stuff that I'll maybe share with you, the power standards that I mapped out. I looked at some documents and things from the Eau Claire Area School District, Chippewa Falls, and Elk Mound. And depending on the district, they probably had anywhere from 6 to 12 power standards for a trimester. And so I kind of thought about maybe focusing on 8. And I tried doing that, and the units matched up pretty well with trimesters, but some trimesters there was maybe more than 8 and some a little less, which is okay. I think the thing that's challenging about reading and language arts instruction is there's so many moving parts and pieces. In reading, there's 4 or 5 main components like phonics, fluency, comprehension, and so on. Another thing with the language arts is even looking at the writing in English, even though Tammy teaches that, they kind of go hand in hand. I help map that out. There's so many parts to writing in English and when you're looking at grammar. So essentially what happened with the writing and the reading a little bit is I also came up with some substandards. And depending on the substandards, you could come up with 6 to 12 substandards too. And I tried to maybe keep it to 6 to 8. I think as a teacher, it's nice having those substandards, but as a group, a fourth grade group or a 3-5 unit or elementary school, we'd have to talk about, do you want to just report and show the power standards, or do we also want to show the substandards too? For example, what I mean by a substandard is maybe we're looking at cause and effect one week, but then a substandard, a minor strand and element, is also looking at context clues. Context clues is something that's important in fourth grade, but maybe not all of those substandards are important. So I think that's something as a unit, a team, a committee, we'd really have to look at if we get that far one day. And also I'd like Mark and Tammy to look over this stuff more too, even though I did sit down with them some. So just looking at the number of standards, power standards and substandards we'd have would be another thing to look at. Also, I was maybe ambitious with my goal. A lot of our social studies is mapped out, but I thought I could do something similar to this for a report card, and I didn't get that far this year. It was also my hope to maybe do the same with Mark, just mapping things out for science and math, and I didn't get that far. I didn't get a chance to talk to, well, we talked about it, but I didn't get a chance to work with him on it. But that's something that could be done this summer or down the road if I continued to do some more work with this project. So I maybe didn't get quite as far there. Also, from a student standpoint, there was growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year with unit test and projects. If I talk about the projects, if you looked at our very first project we worked on to yesterday, our social studies fair projects, I would have to say they were some of the best projects and presentations I've seen or that we've had for a while. So there was growth in that process, which was good to see. But if we looked at some of the reading projects, some of the students had a struggle with trying to incorporate everything into their project in terms of picking an essential question to answer and then how to answer it through picking a reading strategy and skill to do that. Now, there's an example I have and I'll share with you that Kendall Osmussen, Addison Haynes, and Larissa Johnson worked on. They did through the form of a Google slideshow, but they did a really good job with cause and effect, and I think I'd be hard-pressed to maybe find some middle schoolers or high schoolers to put a project together like that. But I'm hoping that if I do something the same or similar next year, that now for my sake I have an example of what I was really looking for, and more importantly, the students will too. But the first project we did, they were able to pick an essential question to answer, and that was really apparent in their projects and presentations for reading, but they had a hard time of showing the strategy and skill they used. Now in the second project, you saw a little bit more of that, like students being able to pick a strategy and skill to use, especially the higher students and some of the middles, but the lows really struggled with that. But overall as a group, I think that's maybe something I can teach better, and they could get better at as well. So that was kind of the project component inside of things using the power standards. I did want to provide more of a formal and traditional piece there too, to just see if focusing on the projects and power standards was going to affect that instruction at all. And overall it really didn't, even though I maybe didn't get through as much in reading this year or get through as many unit tests. Students did really well in terms of grade averages for different tests. So for example, our first unit test, the average in the grade was 71%. I've kept data from the last 3 to 4 years that other groups, their average has been 60%. Yes, 60%, but these are pretty complex tests because there's a big change from second to third grade testing, and even more so third to fourth grade testing with the type of tests they take. So they had 71% was the average, and just kind of looking at that, that was, you know, up 11% from the 60% average we normally get. Unit 2 goal, then we kind of go from 60% average to 70%. Well, for Unit 2, the grade got nearly 80%. They had 78%. So, you know, they had about 8 percentage points improvement there. And I'd be curious to see how they did on a Unit 3 or Unit 4 test, but we might not get to that or might just get to one of them. So from that aspect, there was improvement there. In terms of projects, even though we maybe struggled, there was, in the beginning, there was improvement throughout. Just looking at some of the numbers and data here, our overall average in the grade on our first project was 85.5%, so about 86%, which is pretty good. And then on the second project, the overall grade and average using these power standards and essential questions and strategies and skills was 92%. So they improved there. So if we're looking at that, there's improvement. Now, I think I'm okay with, maybe 5-10 years ago I wouldn't have been okay with not maybe covering as much, but I felt doing some of these projects and using the power standards to guide their learning provided maybe for more authentic learning, maybe more choice and voice that the students had in their learning. And I really did talk about from the start of the year to the end of the year where they ended up with their projects and presentations. You know, so I think this fostered some more collaboration with Mark, Tammy, and I, even though they had different goals. But one thing that it probably fostered more than anything was what we would do with the potential report card one day, what we would do with project-based learning one day. For example, this year, depending on the week and when we had Phi Ed, we would have 2 or 3 extra days a week, 40 to 45 minutes, and we would use that time for technology type things and essentially Genius Hour type projects. Now, I think Genius Hour and passion projects have a lot of worth and value, but I also think that maybe by the time kiddos get to 4th grade, there's a little bit of overkill with it, and they're maybe burnt out, and maybe the quality suffers a little bit. For example, some of the Genius Hour projects we did this year, some of the highs had some really wonderful ones, but maybe we didn't get quite what we wanted out of our lower students. There could be different reasons for that, but it just felt like they're kind of canned presentations. So we were thinking if we had this same time next year, how could we use projects, how could we use power standards and essential questions to maybe redefine things a little bit in our schedule and curriculum and what we do. And we talked about maybe having more of a guided Genius Hour where we would use these 40 to 45 minutes of extra time on a daily and weekly basis to look at a list of things we want to cover with strategies, skills, essential questions, and projects in science and social studies and or even reading, and we would use that time to work on that. So I think it'd help all our project and research learning time, but also we would still value our other instructional time, and I think we could probably cover more stuff then in a better manner. So essentially, that was kind of my journey and process along the way with power standards and how I used it to look at unit tests, a more formal and traditional curriculum, how it maybe helped the students out more with research and project-based learning and their paths. And then also kind of the start of it was just, you know, how would it help me and maybe our 4th grade and 3-5 unit in elementary school if we ever really redefined and revamped our report cards to go with power standards. So I think I have a good starting point and roadmap and template, at least for the 4th grade, and we can see where it takes off for next year or down the road. So thanks a lot, Joe, and we'll talk to you later.